So, I have just finished watching Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. And I gotta say, I came in with decent expectations of this film. I'm not expecting something grandiose, but I also wasn't expecting season one of Rings of Power. However, I came away happily pleased. Let me explain to you why I thought Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim is a better film than I expected it to be right after this. All right, guys, Brent here, back here for Geek Variants, where we cover all things Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, anime, gaming, Star Wars, and more. This time, Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, and I'll do my best to keep this short, sweet, and concise. But as we all know, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, Lord of the Rings is one of my bread and butter. So if I do tend to go on a bit of a diatribe, I apologize in advance. This film was a beautiful love letter written to the Rohirrim. This was a film that encapsulated the spirit and energy of one Helm Hammerhand. And for a lot of people, they're going to kind of go ahead and kind of try and dismiss a lot of what that was and kind of give our main character, Hera, significant lighting that I don't think which is amicable for her character. Let me explain. Originally, we get introduced to Hera. She's a bit of a wild card. She's kind of a free thinker, does what she wants, doesn't follow the rules, just beats to her own drum, if you will. She just kind of does things, and people around her just like, that's who she is. That's what she's about. You're just gonna have to kind of deal with it. And we see her initially trying to befriend an eagle because, again, when you need Deus Ex Machina, the Eagles are always it for Lord of the Rings. For whatever reason, the Eagles always arrive when you need them. Hera's trying to befriend a white eagle. Ultimately, she's not able to get close to it because she wants to be able just to touch it. She wants to be able to say that she was at least able to get close enough that's where she can befriend nature in that regard. Ultimately, she's unsuccessful in her first go around, and then she's summoned back to Eris, where she is going to go ahead. There was a council called, not by the king. A moot was summoned, not by the king, which is non traditional, but it can happen from time to time. Ultimately, Helm is that king, and it turns out that there was a member of his council who did not believe he was fit ultimately to be king. He didn't think he was fit to be king because someone from Gondor, apparently and allegedly, offered to marry Hera directly out from under him, selling that line off to the Gondorians, which is crazy to think that would be such a main issue because you had two sons already established with Hera. She has two older brothers. They are prominent figures. They're very good men, and they're people that you would think ultimately people wouldn't be too concerned about the line going off at some point in time. There could be other women for them, and then boom, the line passes on to the next male heir, so on and so forth. But apparently, it's a big sticking point, and the big sticking point for this moot leader is his son is the name of Wolf, who turns out to be our main villain throughout this whole movie. Wolf is someone who wants to prove himself. He's kind of an upstart. He's not a terrible individual, but I will say he was flawed as a villain for me. He did not live up to the hype in which he was given credit for in the initial trailers. He did not deliver for me. Wolf only goes down this villain arc because his dad, set him down this path. His dad decides to call out the king, and basically they just throw verbal blows back and forth against each other. And Helm is just like, look, let's go settle things outside like real men. I can't hit you inside my home. It's bad taste and it's bad character. So they go out basically by the front gate of Edoras. And then ultimately, Wolf's dad throws three straight punches, hits Helm as hard as anyone thinks could possibly imaginable. Helm eats it like it's straight nothing. Ends up bleeding a little bit out of the side of his mouth, and he just kind of gives him this look like, "Are you done?" The other guy is still a little bit shocked because he's like, "All right, I got three good punches on the king. I'm going to be able to do this. I'm going to be able to finish this job." Not so fast. Helm one punches this man. Like he is literally Saitama in this film. If you're an anime fan, you get that reference. His name is One Punch Man. Helm Hammerhand goes this, cracks Wolf's dad directly in the neck, and that's all she wrote. Drops him one punch, dead in the middle of the streets of Edoras. Wolf, of course, is like beside himself because he was like, I truly loved Hera. I wanted to do the right thing and become the next person to potentially take the throne and usurp, the line from Helmhammer Hand's sons. I wanted to be that person. I wanted to be king. Me and her kind of had like a little thing beforehand, which was one-sided, I might add. And ultimately, things just continue to go poorly. Wolf then decides to swear vengeance directly on Helm Hammerhand in front of him, decide to swing a sword at him, and Helm literally grabs him with one hand and lifts him by his neck sky high. And only because Hera begs him not to end him, he continues to live to this day. Not really believable as a main villain because he kind of now comes off as grimy. He doesn't come off as someone you believe is a serious threat. He's someone who is going to do things the wrong moral way to get the job done to meet his ends of revenge. Because not only did he swear vengeance on Helm Hammerhand, he swore vengeance on both his sons and Hera. Because ultimately, he still feels very spurned by Hera because she was like, hey, will you marry me? I love you. And she's like, no, flat out, no. It was point blank, period. There was no exclamation point needed. She made her point very clear. Ultimately, they decide to end up banishing Wolf, and he ends up going to find the Dunlendings. And then the whole rest of the film is him and the Dunlendings versus Helm Hammerhand and his family. Ultimately, Wolf uses some absolutely shady methods to try and defeat Helm Hammerhand because he's never lost in battle, not once. Ultimately, he ends up making one of the other members of the Moot break faith with Helm Hammerhand to betray him so they can outflank him, storm Edoras, and then basically try and eliminate all the civilians. But our girl Hera was smart enough, saw everything that was going on, and was able to stop what was going on, even though Oliphants were definitely a key member of what was going on. Hera's brothers decide to go ahead and they take out the Oliphants, defending what Edoras' home fort really looks like. And then Wolf decides to be shady. Arrow shot straight through one of the son's necks, killing him off then and there. The other brother is really fond of an older horse, and that older horse, as they're making their retreat, because Edoras has been routed, they're going to the Deep. At this point, it doesn't have Helm's Deep attached to it. The name is completely different and separate from who he is. But at this moment in time, we see that the old horse is starting to slow down, starting to wheeze, starting to gag, and is basically losing its will to live, continue to run, and it can't physically keep up while they're being chased by Wolf and his horde of about 4 or 5 other horsemen. By the time we catch back up with everyone at, the Hornburg, we are stuck with Helm's son being held behind as a prisoner and ultimately then beheaded directly in front of the king. The king said, look, I surrender. I'm done. I can't do this. I will give up my life. Just spare my people, spare my son, spare my lineage. Wolf, being the absolute buffoon that he is, decides to neglect. His counselor or his commander throughout this film is 100% correct in everything that he does throughout this whole film. He was more of the villain than Wolf was because he would have played his cards correctly and he would have won correctly. Because the Hornburg, as we all know if you've watched Lord of the Rings, cannot be sieged. It has never been besieged to a victorious cause from the person attacking it. It's never been done. Winter, summer, spring, first age, second age, third age, wouldn't have mattered. The Hornburg always has stood, as have the people of Rohan, behind it. That's why it's always their fallback. They always win on home field advantage. This is who they are. This is what they've been about. Horses, Hornburg, they win. That is how it is done. They're a tough, sturdy, reliable people. And as everything continues to escalate, Wolf continues to swear vengeance on everybody, and Helm is ultimately just riddled with arrows, and he's left to be in almost a comatose state, and everyone's assuming that he's no longer going to make it. He can't be ruler, and it's a harsh, harsh winter. Food supplies are running low. You're even running low on supplies for logs, so you're not able to create as many fires as you like. People are passing from the cold, from hunger, from sickness. It's just a terrible situation. The Dunlendings are just sitting at your doorstep enduring the winter because they're hardy people. They are the hill tribes. This is what they do. They are born and bred for this. But as the situation unfolds, a story about a wraith starts getting out. The story of the wraith is that there is Helm's Hammerhand's ghost because they believe him to be dead because he's comatose, that he is going out each and every night and using his bare hands and ripping apart grown men a handful at a time from the Dunlendings. And this myth and legend continues to grow and get further and further out of hand. And most people, like me, the viewer, was like, there's no way he's not doing this. This can't be it. If you read the books, you knew, but I've been very rusty on keeping up with my book lore. And ultimately, it turns out this man, every single night for a couple months, had been slipping by everyone. There was a secret passage outside his door, and then his daughter had fallen asleep literally on the edge of his bed, trying to keep an eye on him, make sure he was stable and comfortable, slipped out right by her. And he is a gargantuan man. This man has not missed a day at the gym in his life. He was just jacked beyond jacked belief. Snuck out and was in fact going 1v1 or 1v5 with all these Dunlendings and ripping them apart. It turns out there were some other forces at play. There were some orcs that were out looking for a ring. And if you know which ring we're talking about, you know that ultimately we know who they were kind of rooting for and kind of working for, and kind of behind the scenes, a nice little touch at the end there. As we're ultimately going through there, we find that Hera accidentally stumbles into this passage, and she kind of goes down this whole rabbit hole, this path, ending up right outside where the orcs were waiting for her with a giant troll. And I mean giant troll. Like, this thing had gargantuan horns on it. He was at least 8, 9, maybe 10 feet tall, built like an absolute brick house. And they were going to go ahead and just basically skewer up Hera, barbecue her, and call it a day. There wasn't much meat on her bones, but it was still a snack enough for the orcs to be like, hey, might as well. Then you hear a freakish roar, and next thing you know, Helm Hammerhand is standing out there in a blizzard, in a tank top and pants. And he is no weapons, no dagger, no axe, no hammer, just his bare hands, scrapping with 2 orcs, punches one to death, punches the other to death, and then goes 1v1 with a basically ogre slash troll. We don't really know what it truly was. And he punched off its tusk, then started beating the crud out of it. And then when it was punching at him with his full force, he blocked it with his fists. This man was insane. And as the kind of exchange blows back and forth, Hera helps, grabs a spear, hucks it right through, hits the ogre right in the eye, kind of blinds it, goes breaking close to the brain, and Helm continues just to pummel it into submission before ultimately he sees Hera and breaks out of this berserker-like fury he has caught himself in, and he's like, I'm not fit to be king. I'm not fit to be ruler. I go out every night as my penance for my son's death because I should have listened to you. I should have moved out of Edoras. I shouldn't have continued this fight. I should have listened and not exiled one of our cousins, ultimately sending him off into banishment because Hera had been kidnapped at one point by Wolf and broken out from Orthanc. Ultimately, now, as we're circling back into the main fray of the action, the people are basically distraught and just absolutely distraught. Wolf figures out that Helm is up there with Hera. Him and a whole squad of people start chasing after him, and then Helm makes the craziest move I've ever seen by jumping down a cliff-like ravine while holding on to his daughter. Makes it down, and as they're going to the gates of the Hornburg, it's so frozen shut, 6 men are not able to turn a wheel to get the door to open. So, of course, what does Helm Hammerhand do? Sticks his bare hands in this like this and rips it clean open. Then ushers in his daughter and then says, hey, remember me. You can do this. I believe in you. And then Helm Hammerhand fights off every single attacker for an entire night in the middle of a blizzard in a tank top and pants with his bare hands only. Bare hands only for an entire night, ultimately dying standing with his fist held up triumphantly. If that is not some of the most epic things you have ever heard, that is wild. But Helm Hammerhand was that dude. But ultimately, we get down to the showdown where Wolf is still like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and still attack Hera anyway, even though his general's like, look, you've won. There's nothing else for us to gain from this. There's no money. There's a land. You basically spent all your coffers. Your siege weapon is basically out of wood. There's nothing else we can do with it. What in the world do you think is going to happen from this, especially if the Dunlendings figure out that we're out of gold? They're going to leave. They were promised a great reward. If they don't get that great reward, we're next. So Helm, of course, well, not Helm, Wolf decides to end up lying to them, use the last of the gold, throw it on the ground, and be like, look, the Hornburg is full of that. All that gold you could want and more is in there. And ultimately, they decide then to rally and go ahead and attack the Hornburg. And our girl Hera figures out, hey, there's a way out. We're going to go ahead and leave a couple people behind in order to secure our escape. But ultimately, we're going to make one last stand with me and a couple people. And she made a bold decision to go up and basically ice pick her way up a mountain to go ahead and scale her way to a white eagle with her father's armor. She wanted her father's armor carried off to her cousin, who has been waiting for a signal from Rohan for who knows how long now, basically all winter, to be able to come and assist and be, the proper bannermen that they are. When you are called, you answer, and they stood at the ready for the call from their king. Now, seeing the armor there, their cousin ultimately decides to don the armor because just even the visage of Helm Hammerhand has the Dunlendings just petrified. They want nothing to do with this man because, for every single night for about a couple months, he would just sneak out, tank top and pants, bare hands, and rip people apart and just destroy them. So they're terrified of even seeing the armor of that dude still up walking around. Wolf's even scared a little bit, and he's like, Helm, he's alive? And like to me, it gives non-credible as far as villainy is concerned. But he was just doing vengeance for the sake of doing what his dad wants to do. He wasn't doing villainy because it's what was in his blood. He was almost a Draco Malfoy type of character. And if you haven't seen Harry Potter, sorry for the spoils. But Draco wasn't truly evil. He had bad parentage, and ultimately he was led astray down a path he didn't want to go. In the end, he redeemed himself. But in Wolf's hand, he sold himself out to follow his father's path down to a failed road. He ends up 1v1ing Hera, and Hera was like, hey, if you're a coward, if you ain't a real man, if you want to prove that you can ultimately take out the line of Helm Hammerhand, I'm standing right here. You aren't a legitimate king. You couldn't even beat a woman. He didn't like that very much, so obviously they 1v1. She defeats him rather soundly. She's been training her whole life, so it's not a Mary Sue kind of moment. There was kind of some moments where, like her being able to ice repel up an entire mountain in the middle of a blizzard, is a little bit crazy, but people have done wilder things in moments of passion. Like we've all heard the story of a mother who was able to like lift a car with her bare hands to save her child underneath just because like random moments of strength just hit. That would probably what I chalk it up to. And ultimately, she was able to defeat him. And then the general that was serving Wolf comes up and is like, hey, need to honor this. We need to leave. We need to get out of here before the Dunlendings figure what's going on. Call this off. Let's go home. Let's just call it a draw. We're out of here. Wolf decides then to betray his general, shivs him, drops him, and then decides to proceed with the attack because, hey, all morals are off. And ultimately, Wolf ends up succumbing to a battle with Hera where she smashes his throat in with the shield to the point just basically breaking off breaking his trachea, so to speak. And he wasn't able to breathe and take in any oxygen. So he was just smothered to death by a shield. Ultimately, it was a very happy, good story by the very end of things. The cousin who came to assist now becomes the ruler of Rohan, and Hera decides that she's just going to go off on some adventure because a wizard summoned her off to go and give some information about those rings that were ultimately being taken by orcs off the corpses of the fallen that Helm absolutely ravaged. I'm sure the orcs were probably eating them, but it wasn't 100% definitively said. And we had a great homage from the one and the only Christopher Lee, had a couple lines in it. May he rest in power, Sir Christopher Lee. We thank you for your service as far as Saruman is concerned, because he does get the key to the Tower of Orthanc, and he says, if you ever need me, just call me. I'll be there. And it was a very nice touch. They had a lot of great homages to the Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't something that based the entire story on nostalgia. It was something that did nostalgia correctly, but not to a T, not to a fault. This is the best thing Lord of the Rings has done since the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's better than The Hobbit. It is better than Rings of Power season 1 and season 2. This film was fantastically done. I think they did a great job. If this is a lot more like what we're going to get for The Hunt for Gollum, you should be more interested in what's going on with Middle Earth. It will be an enjoyable ride for you guys. It's fun for the whole family. It does tend to err a little bit more on the mature side at times, but again, the gore isn't over the top. There's not overly promiscuous themes. There's nothing shoved down your face as far as any type of stigmas, any types of agendas, anything of that nature. It was just a fun film. It was really well done. Howard Shore's music played throughout. It was really, really nicely done. I think it's a good film. Hey, you listen to me for 20 minutes, be sure to hit that lovely red subscribe button. Greatly appreciate each and every one of you for hearing me out. And hey, let me hear your thoughts. You've listened to me for 20 minutes. The least I can do is listen to your comment section about your thoughts on this film. Again, wasn't paid to go see this, wanted to go see this, really, really enjoyed what this film was. So be sure to hit that lovely subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.